right. Well, we still have a few folks rolling in, but we will go ahead and get started. This is a recorded session, so you should receive recordings, but and slide deck. But to get started, we're actually going to roll out a poll. So what is your current level of experience with Google BigQuery? This is just kind of the level set where you might feel like you fit, whether you are currently new to BigQuery or whether you have very advanced techniques. Obviously, for this first webinar, we do see this as an opportunity to more so get people up to speed on BigQuery. So it might not be, specific to more of the advanced users, but this is the base level. We like making sure we have a solid foundation. And so that is what we're doing. We're building that solid foundation through this webinar. And we will continue to advance it, so push it down the road. And so a lot of these topics that we'll be discussing today will be leveraged in later BigQuery webinars where we might dive into more advanced. And y'all will have your opportunities as well later to kind of explain or provide your input on where you might have specific issues with BigQuery or wanting to learn more about BigQuery, so that can kind of guide webinars in the future. Awesome. So it looks like we have a good amount of users participating in that. So we will leave it open for just a few more moments and go ahead and close it. So if you haven't selected anything, feel free to go ahead and select that, what your level of experience with Google BigQuery is, and we will go ahead and continue. Perfect. We can go ahead and jump into the agenda. So for today's agenda, we'll be covering an introduction to BigQuery. So what BigQuery is, the benefits and considerations, as well as the GA4 integration, the various integration abilities that you have there, some use cases that you can leverage BigQuery for. From there, we'll jump more to the BigQuery side. So this is going to be leveraging, so cost estimation calculator, billing account setup, access management, so on and so forth, to make sure that you're able to get started with BigQuery if you haven't done so. And then we'll also dive into BigQuery basics, so the actual export schema for GA4, common queries, executing jobs, so on and so forth, from that point of view. And then we will end with a live BigQuery demo, just to make sure that you kind of see the tool, how we like to leverage it here at InfoTrust, and some of the common ways that you might use it. And then we'll obviously have our resources, Q&A, to follow that as well. And go ahead and jump to the next one. So a little bit about InfoTrust. If you have not heard about InfoTrust, if this is the first time that you are have joined something that InfoTrust has put on, welcome. If this is the time that, or if this is your many times you've interacted with InfoTrust, welcome as well. Just for those who don't know who InfoTrust is, we are focusing on digital analytics and media enablement. We like sitting at the intersection with our privacy-centric solutions to drive measurable business outcomes for brands and agencies. So we work with many brands and agencies. Obviously, we have our GMP sales partner as well as cloud partner. We also work with Optimizely, and we are resellers in GA360, DV360, Campaign Manager, as well as Support Looker Studio and Google Tag Manager as well. That's just a handful of the products that we actually work with. So we work with many other products as well, but Google is one of our trusted partners that we like to work with. And with that brings us to our webinar host. So my name is Jared Fisher. I'm today's webinar host. I'm a lead digital analytics specialist focusing on web. I am based out of Bloomington, Illinois. I've been with InfoTrust for a little bit over 3 years here, and I kind of help internally guide GA4 best practices. I've maybe worked with some of y'all, but welcome. That's a little bit about me, but I am not the focus of today's webinar, so I will actually pass this over to Chanvi to give a quick introduction of herself and kick us into our webinar today.
Thanks, Jared, and thank you everyone for joining this webinar and taking out some time from the busy schedules. I am Chanvi Kotak, a business intelligence engineer at InfoTrust. I've been working over 2 years now at InfoTrust, and primarily my work involves with working with ETL data pipelines, which allows to create solutions which are cost effective, scalable, and meeting your business end. And speaking of introduction, there's one more asset which does need introduction. That's our topic for today, introduction to BigQuery. We'll be going through the overview, benefits, considerations. How can you integrate your GA4 data? So let's get started. Coming to the question, what is BigQuery? So you can consider BigQuery that's used for data lakes as well as data warehouse, meaning that you would have structured, semi-structured, large volume of data with different data types like CSV, JSON, Avron, Parquet. And it's a fully managed service, meaning that you do not need any team or administration to get you set it up. It's a cloud-based interactive tool, so you can just start using it. And it's part of a GCP suite of products. So you can see that BigQuery is not only used for your storage purposes, but also for your processing and analyzing of data. Coming to benefits, it does offer a lot. So the first foremost thing is that you can interact with massive data sets, like you can query billions of rows, and it would take you few seconds to write or read your data. And it uses a SQL style query syntax. It's really reliable and secure. So let's say if one of your server gets down, then data is still available because it's replicated across multiple sites, and it is secure through access control list, which means that you have full control on like what permissions you should be giving it to the users and what users can view. So every granular level details you can set. It's scalable in terms of like you can store hundreds of terabytes and you only pay for what you use. Cost savings, it does not have any external hardware setup. You do not need any team for you to set up a BigQuery. Although at the moment, BigQuery has a fixed monthly fee of $0.2 per gigabytes of stored data. And let's say if you are using long-term storage tables and that has not been updated in the last 90 days, then that storage cost drops by 50%. You could also use data transfer services, like if you want to connect your other data sources from the Google Suite, that is your Google Ads, SA360, Campaign Manager, and many more. I know we've been talking benefits, but there are some limitations, or I would say considerations to keep in mind. Let's say if you are dealing with large data sets and if you do perform complex joins, then inefficient queries can lead to higher cost or slower performance. If you do plan to use the data transfer services, and depending on what's the volume of data you are transferring or how much of a frequency you are using to transfer those, it can incur more additional cost. At this point, it does not have any traditional backup methods available in BigQuery, but it also allows you snapshots for 7-day window and they are enabled by default. Considering on like you would be running multiple queries or multiple members would be processing data, there is a chance of running into a bottleneck when it comes to high demand environments. Now let's talk about how could you use BigQuery with your GA4 data. So although there are different types of data that you can use BigQuery for, but considering our native integration between GA4 and BigQ, let's say if you have a GA4 account, you can store the unsampled event level analytics data from app or web. And what you can do is once you have that data exported to BigQuery, you can manage on how do you want to store your data and also manage on what permissions to what users you should give using your ECLs, that's access control list. Once you integrate your GA4 data, you can have options of, as we mentioned, integrating with other data sources also, and you could build custom models out of it. So it's not just your GA4 data, but a combination of different data sources to leverage it. But before we get started on like how do we use the BigQuery export, it is essential to understand that there are few requirements before we get started. First thing is, in order to link a BigQuery to GA4 property, you need to have an email address which has owner access to the BigQuery project, and it has a GA4 editor role to that property, which includes the data stream that you want to link. So when you do go under your product links, you could see a BigQuery link. And within that, there is an identity and access management policy within a BigQuery Studio, which allows you to grant roles to different users, telling you what level of permissions you can give to that user. In terms of BigQuery export, there are 4 different type of exports available. Daily is where you can have full export of your data at an interval of 24 hours. Then there is your streaming export, or I would say intraday, which has continuous export of data throughout the day. But this option is not available in our free version of BigQuery. And then there is fresh daily export, which basically does come with a support of SLA, which is service level agreement, which guarantee you that a complete set of data would be available same time each day. And this export is similar to your daily export. User level export is where you would have data at the user level. Again, it is available at the interval of 24 hours, but at a user level. Now, before we go dive deeper into these different types of exports, we do need to ensure in your export option that you do configure your data streams and events. As you see, there are different export type options which you need to select from, whether it is your daily, your fresh daily, your streaming, or your user data. A common question here is, can I have all the 4 types of exports available? Yes, definitely you can have, and you can enable them all at once. So just let's go a little more detail into these things. As you can see from this picture, like the most frequent, or I would say the common export is the daily export. It does provide you a raw unsampled GA4 event data from previous day. It can take up to 72 hours for your data to be fully completed. And once you enable this export, under your BigQuery Studio panel, we will go through in detail about how this structure looks. But your table would be generated with the following schema, that is events underscore your year, your month, your date. Similarly, if you're choosing intraday export, which is a real-time export, and it does not have any export limit currently, but for new user traffic source, data is not included in this export. And as I mentioned previously, if you do choose in the option of your intraday export, you do need to upgrade from your sandbox version. After choosing this particular export type, you could see in that your tables are available in the format of events, intraday, year, month, and day. Coming to user export, when you choose this option, it would allow you to export your audience data, predictive data, and then it would have 2 tables generated for you. That's your users and pseudonymous users. For fresh daily export, you would see that we have mentioned that it is something that would guarantee you a complete data set at same time each day. But details for more on how the service level agreement would look like will be coming in the 360 properties. Again, the type of schema table that would be available once you choose this particular export would be your events fresh, year, month, and date. Again, there are few other things that we do need to consider when we are choosing these BigQuery exports, and like what can you anticipate. So let's say I do have a property ID, for example, 2728170 in my GA4, and I want to link that property to my BigQuery. Once I do link that property, you would see a new data set created in my BigQuery Studio with that property name, as you see your analytics 272811760. Below that property, you can see basically, I would say data set, not property. Below my data set, I would see my different tables that we spoke about in the previous slide. That is, you would see events table if you have chosen daily export, events intraday, pseudonymous users, events fresh. Now, I know we did talk about having events, year, month data, and you see here that in the bracketed format, it's 955. This basically indicates that these many days of events were collected. When you expand your event data set, that's where you will see for each day that particular format with year, month, and date. Other few things to do make in consideration is that the GA JavaScript library uses first-party cookie to remember what a user has done on its previous pages, interactions, visits, and to the same domain. So for GA4, if a cookie is used to distinguish unique users based on anonymous identifier, that would be called as client ID. It is user pseudo ID in BigQuery. And also you can pass in your first party user identifier in GA4 via the user ID configuration setting. Few more things to understand about these export types is, let's say we are talking about intraday export. These are real-time tables and it is available for the current day. Once it loads the full current day, it automatically deletes itself. For user export, as we know, there would be two tables created. One important thing to understand is, let's say if a user declines consent through Google consent mode, privacy info field shows no as a value, and your user pseudo ID and session ID values become null. Considering what's about the user pseudo ID, that's a row for every pseudonymous identifier. This data for a user is updated when there is a change in one of the fields. Data for unconsented users is not exported to this table. User IDs are not exported to this table. And going to the user ID part of it, again, each row contains user ID, and that is updated only when there is a change to any one of those fields. Data for unconsented users can be exported to this table if it includes a user ID. Pseudo IDs are like not exported to this table. Coming to next piece of it on what are the use cases where you can leverage your BigQuery is you can combine your GA4 data with your CRM data or Salesforce or Google Ads, and then you can have your custom data models built or use it as a marketing warehouse. Or you could run it on for advanced analysis, like let's say if you want to build up custom attribution models or propensity modeling or build custom segmentation. Or you could use to answer few business questions using the visualization tools like Looker Studio, Power BI. It seems like it's time for a poll and time for a water break for me. So let's get into this question here. What challenges do you currently face when analyzing GA4 data in BigQuery? I'll give it a moment here. I hope everyone is getting the time and you are liking these poll questions. Do let us know if you have any more questions. And let's move further ahead with our agenda for today. So another few things that you do want to consider before getting started is on how much it is going to cost me to use BigQuery. How can I set up my BigQuery? How do I manage the accesses? So let's go a deeper into these topics. So the first thing is about cost estimation. When it comes to BigQuery pricing, there are two main components. First one is your analysis pricing. This is the cost you pay to use your SQL queries, your functions, basically all the cost associated to when you run any analysis on the data. Second is your storage pricing because you would be storing data for what you've been using the BigQuery. So these are the two main components. Apart from that, there are certain few more operations where, for example, there is BigQuery, Omni, there's BigQuery ML, Engine, or any other streaming reads and writes. Let's say if you do not have any idea or you still want any estimate on how much it's going to cost, Google has a cost estimation calculator that you can use to understand how much you can anticipate your monthly expenses. So it would give you an option to choose like what region you are, how much of data you're going to store, or how much of data you're going to process and analyze, and it would give you a breakdown on how much you can anticipate each month. In addition to this, BigQuery also has few free operations and free usage tier. So each project that you have created needs to be tied to a billing account, and that's where you would have all your um, cost associated to it. So this table does tell you like how much you can anticipate in terms of your free usage limits. Like let's say if you're using for storage purposes, with the free tier, you can get your first 10 gigabytes per month free. If you're using for doing your analysis, running queries, then you will have your first terabyte of query data processed free for the first month. If you're trying to use BigQuery ML, then your first 10 gigabytes of data processed by queries would be available for the first month. And if you're trying to use the BI engine, then your first gigabyte of free capacity is available. Again, there's one very essential thing that I would emphasize is here that your billing is not tied to any project, but it's tied to a billing account. So let's say if I have a billing account set up, then I can have multiple projects within my organization, which would be attached to that billing account. Getting into more detail about how the pricing model is available. So there are two pricing models available, and the organization can either choose one of these or you can combine both. Let's assume we do go with the default on-demand pricing. That is basically it. Let's say if you are running any query for analysis, what it would do is it would try to use in your maximum slots, and then the slots that you used, it would charge you for using those slots. Let's say I do know that my organization is big, I have multiple projects, I have multiple members who are using it. And then I could go in for flat rate, where either if I know that there is a certain time that I want to commit to using slot, which would allow me to run my analysis data, then I could use my flex slots. Or let's say I know that there is something that I've been processing monthly, then I can commit to the monthly slots. And if you do choose the longer term commitment, you can get discounted price. So as I mentioned, it's up to the organization and also what needs you have. You could choose the pricing model from. And in case if you want to learn more or understand like which is the best suitable model for your organization, we have workload management using reservations by Google, which would allow you to understand in detail about these pricing models. Let's understand now about access management. Yes, we did go over through our billing requirements, but how do we get started? Like, which person can own setting up these billing accounts? How can a person set up projects within the BigQuery, or how can they link those data sets that we've been talking about? So there are different levels and different level of accesses at the project data set level also. We'll go in the structure of the BigQuery post this. Coming to the requirements, let's say I do want to have full control over what process I'm doing in BigQuery, then I do need to have an BigQuery admin access. Let's say I want to own the project, then I need to have a data owner access, which could allow me not only to create, but update, delete data sets, or also read in the metadata. So that's one of the roles. Let's say I want to give one of my team members just to make few updates or read in the data, then I can provide the member with BigQuery editor access. Or let's say if I have a member who I just want the person to read the data, then I can give the data viewer access. In case if you do want to plan in running jobs or scheduled queries with the project, then there is a role called as BigQuery job user, which is essential in case if you want to run jobs on your BigQuery data. If you do want to have insights about your information schema and understanding the metadata, then there is a role called metadata viewer. Now, these are very specific on handling the BigQuery data. But again, the main role which is you're accountable for your billing is the billing account administrator or billing account user, which can help you set up your GCP and can also access or set up budgeting alerts. Sorry about that. So let's drive some more details as I was talking about projects, data sets, jobs. So let's dive a little more deeper to understand how these things are structured, what you can do within the BigQuery Studio. Coming to the basics here, we have our three main levels in the BigQuery structure. Looking at the figure below here, let me just give you an overview. You have your organization. Under your organization, you will have your billing account. Tied to that billing account, you will have a project or you can have multiple projects. Within that project, you will have your data sets, and then within your data sets, you will have your table. So as we mentioned, the first level here would be your project where you can set up all your permissions or what users can do or what applications you intend to use. Second would be your data set where you would have in all your data and the tables included in the data set. And again, the organization can choose even at a data set level whom to be access given or which member can see of what level data. And third is your table where your actual events or actual data points lie. So these are the three main structures that build up the BigQuery. The fourth thing to understand here is BigQuery jobs, which basically would allow you to manage some task. Like, let's say if you have a certain task which requires data extraction and loading of data, if you need to copy your data, if you need to run queries daily basis or monthly basis, or if you need to transfer your data. So you can use BigQuery jobs and you can run multiple jobs at the same time. Now, as we were talking about the structure, the first structure, as you see here, is the project. Within your project, you have your data sets. And now within your data sets, like let's say I consider one data set here. If I expand the data set, I'll see that there are different tables available within that data set. We will be checking these details towards the end when we have like the live demo version. So let's go into a few more things here. As mentioned, we have four types of jobs that users can run. It's load, it's query, it's extract, and copy. As the name suggests, load is for where users can determine if they want to batch load a stream or generate any data via load function. Queries is, as we mentioned, you can have scheduled queries. If you see in your window here, let's say I have a query that I need to run daily or monthly. What I could do is I can create a job which does that process. I can name it, I can schedule it, and I can give a start and end date to it. So that's how there'll be an automated way of handling your data if you need to process it on whichever frequency you would like. There are options to export a BigQuery table to Google Cloud Storage. So users can export up to 1 GB of data per file, either manually or either using the data transfer services. There's an option of copying an existing table into a new or another table that exists. So that means you can clone things available. Coming to queries, this is where we have two processes. One is the current process and one is an old process. So saving queries, there are three types of saved queries. This is the old process, which I'm talking, which would be depreciated in the upcoming year in 2025. The first type of query here is a private query. So let's say if you do compose a query and if you choose to save them as private, then that is only visible to you. Second is at project level. So let's say if I have too many members within my project, I can choose my query to be at the project level. And within that also, I can choose which member can have access with BigQuery admin, which would allow them to create, view, update, or delete queries. Or I can also choose a member which has only read permissions by giving them BigQuery.user permission. Third is your public type, where you basically save your queries and it is visible to anybody with the query link that gets generated. So anybody who has that link can open it and check it. The process of how to compose, save, and share is very simple. So let's say I have my query editor. I type in my query. I save my query. As you go type in and click on the save button, this window would pop up where you can name your query and you would have a visibility drop down, which would allow you to choose whether it needs to be at private level, project level, or public level. And then you can just click save. Once your query is saved, on your left pane navigation, you can navigate to your personal or project queries, and you can get the link to share that query with the other members you have. Now, coming to our new format, which we'd be using, we have saved queries. It's similar to what we were talking in the previous slide, but this is powered by Dataform. Again, it's used to create and manage your SQL scripts. So let's say in terms of sharing options, again, it uses your IAM, basically your identity access management, to enable which users and groups should have access to. The new version has a version history. Basically, it would keep a history of your queries. You can restore it to previous versions as well. Coming to on how you would save, share, or edit your queries, there are few required roles in order to do that with this version of saved queries. That is, you would need BigQuery job user, BigQuery read session user, code owner, code viewer. To make a small note here, let's say if you do want public access to be given, then you do need to grant all authenticated users principal. And this would allow your users to be shared with public. And again, as I mentioned, these roles and informations would be available under your IAM. The process of saving queries and sharing queries is very similar to what we had seen previously, where you can like compose your query, click the save button. As you see here, you have save query and save query classic. The save query is the new version. The save query is the old version. And once you name your query, there is an option to choose your region. It will show by default the current region of your project level setting. You can change it as well. And once you save your queries in your panel, left panel, you can see that you have your queries folders. And within your queries folder, the query which you have saved, you would have an option to click on the view action. Basically, that is the three dots, and share it with the other members. It would generate a shareable link for you. Now, coming to GA4 schema on how exactly your data is going to look when you do dive into your data sets and tables within the data sets. The first thing to remember here is that everything in GA4 is at event or stems from data passed through an event. So each row here within the table corresponds to a single event. You would have nested rows, so each event can have numerous nested values. Like let's say, for example, I have my event name session start. It can have nested event parameters, and with that nested event parameters, it can have its associated values. Within my columns, as you see, I have a set of nested values too. With that columns also, we can have export some nested fields. Now, when we talk about nesting, let's go into detail of what do we mean by nested fields. But just to keep in mind on how it looks here in terms of like, I have a single row, I have session start and my nested key params with it, and then its associated values. So as we were talking on how to reference a nested field, so the nested field, we have these fields nested in the event table for, I would say, cost savings, because you are dealing with large volumes of data. Hence, we have these nested structures within the event table. And how to reference that nested field is, let's say I have my nested field of traffic source. Within my traffic source, I have traffic source medium, traffic source, traffic source name. How would I go and check for my traffic source medium is using a period, that is traffic source dot medium would give me the value from my nested field. If you are using standard SQL, then you can unnest the data in an array. And if you are using the legacy SQL, it automatically flattens the data table for you. And if there is more than one repeated nested field, it may require more unnesting of that data. So let's move to the demo version of what we were talking about it in terms of like how our data is at the event level, how the nested fields appear. So coming to the BigQuery Studio, this is my BigQuery Studio UI console. If you go to console.cloud.google.com, this is how you can access your BigQuery Studio. As you see here, when we were talking about our BigQuery structure, this is my project, the BigQuery public data. Within my project, I have my data set, which is an sample data set from Google for an e-commerce sample website. Within my data set, as we were mentioning, we have events. And as you see, 92 is basically, it has collected 92 days worth of events. If I click on my events table, it is gonna show that particular event table. From the drop down here, as you can see, I can scroll in and see like which days of events are available, which year. Now, coming to the point where, let's say, okay, I have explored what my data schema looks like. These are the fields available. Now, as you see these arrows, these are your nested fields that we were talking about, your event params associated with your key and value. As we were talking about traffic source, we can see the medium name. Let's say I do want to query the data, but I do also want to see how my data looks like, what data is being stored. So rather than jumping to directly composing a query, what we usually do is we go into the preview mode. Once you go into the preview mode, you would have a highlight on how your data is looking, how can you leverage your data, or what information you can pull in from. As we were talking, like each of this row represents an event. And within that event, you can see, for example, my page view event name has my event parameter keys. All these keys are available and any associated values to those keys. Now, jumping back to how would you go and get started for composing your queries? What is the most easiest format which I would suggest here is, let's start with a simple query, which does not yet include any nested fields. So let's say I do want to pull in my event date. I'll click on event date. It's going to open a split query tab. So you can choose in your fields from here and it would add to your select query. So let's say I want to choose event data. I want my user pseudo ID. I want my event name. Let's just keep it simple for now. As you can see, it would show you how much data it's going to process if you run this simple query. So let's go ahead and run this query. And as you can see, it's going to give back me the event date, the user pseudo ID, and my event name. Now let's go a level detailed where we did talk about how we can unnest these nested fields. So the very first thing here I would go ahead and do is, the first thing here is I would say unnest my event params, and I would name it as event params. And as you see, it also does suggest you if there is any errors in your. So yet this query is unfinished. Let's go ahead and create this query. So the first thing which I did was I unnested my event params. Now I'll go in and add the unnested, basically the data I want to flatten up from my nested field. So let's say I want my event params, a particular key and its value associated to it. For that, I would say my event params dot key, which would give me the key from my event params. Then I would say event params dot value dot my string value. This is basically gonna give you an option of telling you, let's say I have a key page, then it would have string value. Let's say if I have any sessions, then I'll have int value. So we'll go ahead and add in the all type of values we have here. So let's say we have our event params dot value dot float value. Any guesses here what would be next? As you can see, we are gonna go ahead and add in all the values. So we'll have our dot value, dot double value, and the last one would be our int value. So and one more thing, as we were mentioning about traffic, so let's go and add in our traffic source dot medium, I would say, just for flexibility. Now our query is completed. Again, let's check how much data it is gonna process here. It will tell you exactly how much it's gonna process. Let's run this query and look at the results now. As you can see, it has flattened out each row for each event name. Now you can see for this particular user ID, I have my event name, its associated key and its value. As you can see here, it has value for page location. So it is basically telling you that for this particular event date, this is my user pseudo ID. This is my page view. This is my key params associated with that particular event and what is its value. So this is the way you can explore your data. And let me know if you have any more questions. I'll pass it on to my host here.
Awesome. Go ahead and dive right back into the slides here. And we'll actually kick off with our next poll. So which aspect of BigQuery are you most interested in learning about in potential follow-up webinars? We know that obviously we set the foundation here. That was kind of our goal, is that y'all get a strong and sturdy foundation for understanding what BigQuery is, kind of being able to work with it, and being able to get used to it. And so beyond that, obviously, we know that we have some people that might vary on various levels of BigQuery understanding. And so we're very interested in, continuing to come out with new webinars that are most beneficial to y'all as an audience. And so we want to make sure that we're putting our time towards the right thing. So give it about another 15 seconds for replies there. We'll go ahead and move on to our next piece. Awesome. So next, we'll go ahead and dive into our Q&A, and obviously we still have Chanvi with us, so we'll go ahead and just ask some questions here to start. So one question I see here is best practices for managing costs within BigQuery. Chanvi, do you have any thoughts on ways that you might be able to optimize, reduce costs, and ensure that you aren't maybe potentially wasting money where you don't need to?
Sure, Jared. Firstly, thank you, everyone. I hope we can answer all the questions here. Coming to the question you have, the very first thing which comes in my mind about optimizing or managing is, as we were doing the live demo there, the first thing to check is when you are trying to run your query of how much data it's going to process. You do want to be mindful to check on how much data it's going to process. In our live demo, you did see me using like a limit, but to be honest, if you pull in all the columns and if you then say limit 10,000 rows, it's not really gonna be cost effective. I think the cost definitely depends on the number of columns basically you are going to query. So rather than adding a limit to it, I would be very mindful and choose only the columns that I want to query. That's the first thing I would do. Second thing is, let's say if you do have large data sets, we do want to get into the practice of using partition tables so that it can allow you for better scans, and then it would not have created too much of, I would say, processing on your data. And you could have cluster tables. Basically, clustering is used when you query few columns very frequently. So you can, it's kind of a practice where you say, okay, I want to group few things together. I know I am going to query certain columns and it needs to be grouped in a certain way. That's where your cluster tables come into place. And other thing is, let's say if you do have large volume of data sets and you do want to process it, it might be even useful to do a batch processing when you are running these queries. These are the top things that really pop in my mind, but I want to be mindful of any other questions that we have here.
For sure, for sure. And then one thing that I will add from a GA4 side, there is an ability to exclude events. That is something that's maybe not very easy to find. It's underneath your, whenever you're configuring your data sets, you can actually specifically add events that you want to exclude. So user engagement, we see that one be one that's fired very high, but doesn't really provide much data or data points that you want to pull in. So you can go ahead and configure it to exclude maybe user engagement or some of those other events that you don't want to even pass to GA4 that can
Yep,
help.
totally.
Awesome. And then handling large data sets in BigQuery without compromising on performance. We've seen that a couple times. Do you have any suggestions there on ways to still achieve good performance, but still accessing, large data sets?
Um, Again, I would suggest like couple of things here. First is, as I had already mentioned earlier, is making sure you have partition tables. Second is I would consider materialized views. Let's say you do know that there's a certain set of data that you are pulling from your main events table. I would say a subset of data which is going to be frequently used to identify certain KPIs within your data set. What I would do is I would cache that subset of data in a format of materialized view. Other thing which we would suggest is if you can avoid any complex join operations, and this would be possible to achieve when in the process of flattening your data. So you want to make sure that if it requires you to go unnest one more repeated field, you can flatten out your data and then use that data and store it to a table, like a destination table, so that you're not repeating the process every time of going and flattening your data and querying the same subset of data. So these are the standard practices that you could use in order to handle large data sets and optimize your performance, I would say.
So appreciate that. That is super helpful. And last one, GA4 configurations affecting data export into BigQuery. So what are some common, GA4 configurations that might affect that export into GA4?
A very good question, actually. So when we talk about configurations, I know because many of the clients or the sites have been tailored to their business needs, there is a high chance of possibility that you have a very high number of custom parameters to track down the essential data that you need. And this could basically lead to larger data sets. So you do need to make sure that you only configure or export the necessary parameters within your export. Another thing is the frequency of our export. As we did go over the components of different export types, if there is a streaming export, it can certainly generate a lot, like high volume of data because it's like a continuous data export. Also, the retention settings, I would say, can affect the volume of data. So certainly these are the aspects which can impact on how you have configured your GA4 data.
For sure. For sure. Um, Perfect. I know we have about 3 minutes left and we have just a few more slides. So if there's any questions that we didn't answer, we will make sure that we reach out to y'all either via your client teams or someone here at InfoTrust to make sure we get those answered. I know that there's a few that are sitting in the Q&A that we weren't able to get to here today. But we do want to just remind that we do have some resources that are out there. So Chanvi, if you want to jump to the next 2 slides, you can go down one more. So we do have a resource library. There are upcoming webinars all the time. So our next webinar actually here is on October 17th for optimal data architecture for media enablement. That one is going to be hosted by Lucas Long and Tyler Blatt. Some big heavy hitters there hosting a webinar here. So feel free to be signing up for those. Continue to access our resource library. We have new resources coming out weekly, either GA4 related, A/B testing related, or BigQuery related. There's plenty out there. I know there's a BigQuery article that one of our other experts wrote about session level attribution in GA4 in BigQuery. And so I know that's been a hot button topic, and it's something that we like to make sure we're up to date and always keeping things at the forefront of our mind of what we're finding clients struggling with. And with that, we have one very last poll for those who may have stuck around who want to have an InfoTrust team member reach out to them. Please feel free to go ahead. So would you like to receive additional information or a follow-up conversation regarding BigQuery within GA4 analysis? You can feel free to go ahead and select what would be best for y'all. But we also want to take time to thank y'all for coming. So if we jump to our very last slide, if you do have any questions, we'll make sure that we, through this poll question that's going to continue to run, that we reach out to those who select that they would like to be reached out to. But if you don't, and later down the road you decide that you do want to be reached out to, go ahead, contact your project teams if you're a current client and request a workshop. We can do individual workshops. We like to do that for value adds for our clients to make sure that they are getting the most out of their partnership here at InfoTrust. But if you're maybe a future client or someone that does not, feel free to go ahead and contact InfoTrust through that link there, infotrust.com/contact. Once again, appreciate y'all's time today. Hopefully y'all have a wonderful rest of your day and enjoy the fall weather wherever you might be. If you're down in Florida, hopefully y'all stay safe. Thank you for joining.